Welcome to another writing focus. This one is on the argumentative essay. I'm going to start, as always, with a screen share. And let's get that up nice and big for you. So what is the persuasive or argumentative writing? Well, this one is on persuasive and argumentative. And the one thing I want you to note is that the terms persuasive and argumentative do get used interchangeably. So don't get confused if I use one or the other. They're actually both the same type of writing. In this segment, you'll learn about the definition of the persuasive argumentative writing assignment, the two different types of thesis statements for this particular sort of essay, the various types of arguments, and where the skills from this type of writing can actually be applied outside of academics, how to spot a good argument, what arguments require, the rhetorical situations you'll want to take into consideration before embarking upon your own project, and some questions to consider to help you get started. Let's go ahead and dig in. The persuasive essay is really centered around a topic that does have more than one view on the topic. These can be strong opposing sides or just two lighter disagreeing sides. The main objective is to convince your audience that your stance is indeed correct. You want them to agree with your facts, share your values, accept your arguments and conclusions, and try to convince them to adopt your modality of thinking on this particular topic. To do this, you have to build around one central and strong thesis statement or claim. You will need to ask yourself the following questions about your thesis. Is the claim debatable within the field of study? If the answer to this question is no, then you don't have a persuasive piece. You'll likely have an informative piece. Next, you'll want to examine whether or not the claim you are making can be convincingly supported with evidence. For that, you will need to research, which we'll get to later. The other aspect to understand about your thesis is the type you are going to present to your reader. Is your thesis debatable or non-debatable? A debatable thesis is one that not everyone will agree with. You will have those who strongly support this statement and those who will strongly stand against it. That's okay. Your job for the essay portion, that big long research part, is to sway your readers to your side. For example, legal marijuana. Some are for it, some are against it. For the non-debatable thesis, this is a statement that no one is really going to dispute. For example, we all know that bullying is bad and leads to really bad outcomes for the victim. No one is really going to dispute that. You might have someone here or there telling you that bullying helps you find your own strength and to stand up for yourself, but even they will agree that bullying is wrong. When you get to the point where you have your thesis written out, you need to decide what type of thesis you have. Knowing this will help you to collect your research and understand how you might have to shift how you present counterclaims and rebuttals ever so slightly. For example, with the bullying, instead of looking at counterclaims for how it's a positive thing, because we all know it isn't, you can look at the hard but positive outcomes that do arise. Again, the ability to stand up for oneself and maybe even find the strength to stand up for someone else. Maybe looking at some of the groups that have come out of somebody who's been bullied to the extent of suicide and the support groups that come from there could be one of those silver linings that you try to bring to light. While it is a positive outcome to a bad situation, having somebody being able to stand up for themselves, having somebody who knows how to advocate for somebody else who's being bullied, or even a support group these are positives, but they all came out of a really big negative. And this gives you a researchable area to see how many victims become advocates later in life. Again, debatable thesis, non-debatable. Which one do you have? We have different types of arguments, and this is where you can see how arguments can be applied outside of academia. So the first one is the debate. The debate is one of the most common forms of argument. There are two clear sides arguing one issue. One who presents the best argument is deemed the winner. We often see these in the political arenas during election years. For trials, there are also two clear sides. You have the defense and the prosecution. Both sides are given time to present opening and closing arguments to the judge and/or jury. Let's discuss this type as if it was a paper. In between the opening statement with their claim of innocence or guilt, or the introduction with the thesis statement, the closing statements where they summarize their findings, or the conclusion of the trial, there are the strong arguments that are supported with evidence, witness statements, and expert analysis. Each stage of the presentation of these is laid out in a logical order that the defense or prosecution believes will best sway the judge and/or jury to support their stance. Your next one, the dialect argument, is one that, again, has two sides. The opposing views are considered during this type of an argument. In the process, questions are raised to test the strength of the opposition. In addition to this, there's an attempt to establish what is known as common ground within the argument. This is an area of the argument where the two parties can find commonality, something they both agree on. But it pushes beyond the argument to see if there's new ground that can be discovered for both sides. This is how we find further exploration, expanding fields of expertise. The single arguer style is where there's one arguer attempting to convince an audience that their claim is correct. Within this style, the claim is presented and opposing views are confronted. As there is only one arguer, the outcome usually remains uncertain. The one-to-one style is when the single arguer attempts to convince one person of the validity of their claim. The arguer looks for common ground with that one person. You will often see this style engaged on social media platforms, though with it being social media, it does not usually stay to just the one-to-one argument because everyone wants to throw in their opinions and have them heard. You also see this in friendly conversations where one person's views things one way and the other another way. And the conversation, you do try to keep it civil and you do present the facts that you've found. Next, academic investigations. These are common practice in many fields of study. In these, a complex issue is examined. The examiner searches for undiscovered knowledge and truth. This means that they don't really start with a set claim or stance. Instead, they're searching for knowledge. What they originally thought might be right or it might be wrong. The main point is the exploration process and the ability to be open-minded enough to gain new knowledge, regardless of how that makes their original claim look. Think of the scientific method with a hypothesis. Very similar. Not the same, but similar. The final type of argument is the negotiation. This is where you have two or more people argue as a means to reach a consensus. Think of the last time a big group of you went out to eat and couldn't agree on what restaurant to go to. Maybe 3 different restaurants were named and no one agreed on where to go. This led to an argument where each of the main arguers presented their reasoning for the restaurant they wanted to go to. The rest of those in the group mulled this over until finally a consensus could be reached on where to go. Might have meant negotiating a little bit on where you go for the movie or which movie you watch afterwards. When it comes to arguments, it's important to understand that a solid argument entails and what you as a reader and consumer should be watching for. When you understand what makes a good argument, you're better able to dig through the various sources that you're going to encounter. You can watch for how other arguments are construed so that you can gain ideas of your own. And you'll have the added benefit of understanding how others use argument for their advantage to try and sway you to their way of thinking. That means you can really dig past the argument and find just the facts, which leaves you a more informed individual. So then, what are the signs of a solid argument? First, you want to watch for a strong foundation that is rich with factual support. This is the logos of an argument. Any good argument will have strong, tried and tested facts to back up the thesis. If there are not enough facts, there is reason to doubt. Next, you want to watch for logical connections and internal consistencies. A lack of consistencies or coherence can indicate a contraindicatory system, which can lead to doubts. Ask yourself if there are any holes in the connections the author is making. Did they leave something out or brush over something that maybe should have been a little bit more in depth? Another item to be aware of is explanatory power. Was the author able to explain how the piece of information presented supported the thesis? Was the author able to explain why this piece of information is key to their stance? If the answer is no, then there is room for doubt. The same can be true of your paper. Were you able to explain how your information ties to your thesis? Were you able to explain how that information you presented to us supported your thesis? The next piece is one that is really key to your argument. It's the importance of having multiple sources that stack together in a synthesis to support your thesis. You see, when you pull from mostly one source or mostly one author, your research can be skewed and end up with bias, whether you mean for it to or not. To avoid having bias, you want to pull from a variety of credible sources that work together to support your argument. This shows that the information you are presenting has been tried and tested numerous ways by a number of different experts. My sincerest apologies about that. So the reason to have this number of sources and to eliminate that bias is to show your expertise. And the same goes for when you're reading an argument. Did the author use a variety of sources? Or did they pull from mainly one source or author? If they've pulled from mainly one source of information, is there some bias based on that one fact alone? The answer is there might be, which you do need to be aware of when searching through your own sources. The final item to watch for in an argument is the ability to refute contrary arguments. Having facts that support the stance and thesis alone is not enough. There has to be a balance of understanding of the other side of the information as well. If you cannot see what the opposition sees, then you have an incomplete understanding of the topic or issue being examined. Any leading expert, any attorney, Any politician, anyone who has to construct any sort of an argument for their field will tell you that you have to know both sides of the argument, even if you don't agree with the opposition. Why? Because you need all of the information on the topic in order to make a fully informed decision. The same is true of argumentation. You need to have a clear understanding of all sides of information in order to present a strong and clear understanding of how to refute the opposition or how to give a rebuttal. Think about it. Can the defense refute the evidence presented by the prosecution if they do not know what evidence the prosecution is presenting? No, they cannot. Understanding all of the information is key. What does this mean for your research? It means that you need to understand both sides. Also, as a reader, you need to know how to evaluate an argument you are considering pulling information from. Did the author present information adequately and fairly on both sides? If they did not, they have an incomplete argument. All of this brings us to what an argument requires. First and foremost, an argument requires an arguable issue. This is your purpose in writing, your idea, your thoughts. That means that your written voice is the star of the piece and taking center stage, which is the second requirement. You have to be present in your argument. Otherwise, why write? If you are not present, then all you're doing is regurgitating the ideas of other authors. At that point, your audience might as well be reading your sources. You are the one who has this idea. You are the only one who has these unique thoughts that you want to present. And you are the only one who can connect all of these facts for your reader in a way that supports your thesis. So you really are the key. In addition to this, you need an audience. If you have no audience, why write? And I'm not talking about your professor. Writing to the audience of your professor is not going to give you the rich context you can produce when you think about writing for that one person who you know you want to sway to this modality of thinking. That one person who could make the difference if only they had this information. Or that one person you want to help understand this side of the issue. Having that specific person in mind can make a real difference in how you write. And remember, don't make that one person the professor. Have an authentic target audience in mind. After you know your audience, it is important to understand that in order to sway that audience by first showing them what you have in common on this topic, there needs to be a starting point of commonality in order to open the door of understanding and acceptance for the information you present. In many cases, this aspect is used as the introduction because it helps to lay the foundation upon which you can build. A foundation of trust with your reader by using that one aspect you can both agree on. As you consider and construct your argument, it's also important to keep in mind your method of delivery. If you are presenting in front of a group, are you allowed visuals? What visuals would you have to be able to have the most impact to help sway your audience? What if you were only allowed print? If that's the case, are you allowed visuals within the print? What tables or charts might be most useful if you're permitted to use them? What if this is for a literary or academic journal? Are there quotes from your paper, not from your sources, but from your writing, that would really pop out and grab a reader's attention? Which ones? Do you think the publisher might put those in bold off to the side to capture that reader's attention. Finally, you have to have a final outcome. After all, you are arguing about this point for a reason, right? You're hopefully expecting something to come out of all the work you're putting into the creation of this argument, aren't you? Otherwise, what's the purpose of creating it? You don't want to argue just for argument's sake. You want to try and bring about a change or cause your audience to act. If we go back to the arguments that take place in the courtroom, the outcomes that the prosecution hope for are a verdict of guilty, while the defense hopes for a verdict of not guilty. Their final comments in the courtroom are a call to action, the action of voting in a desired way. They sum up the evidence that has been presented along with a passionate argument invoking pathos or emotion from the jury and or judge in hopes that the call to action combined with everything else they have presented will win over the audience to their side. The same is expected of your writing or any other argument you construct. You need to use the conclusion to sway your audience to action that supports your thesis and purpose for creating the argument to begin with. To better understand your purpose for writing your argument, you have to understand your audience. Some questions you're going to want to take into consideration are as follows. Who is your audience? What do you have in common with your audience? What are some of the demographics of your audience? You'll need to consider the size of the audience, their age, gender, nationality, educational level, professional status, and anything else that you might be able to identify to help you know what language and tone to use. In addition to this, you'll want to know what some of their organizational affiliations are. These could include political, religious, and even social groups. Why? Because knowing these areas of your audience could help you to understand what information you would need to present specifically. You would not present to a political group the same that you would to a religious group. There are certain facts that you would present differently, or topics that you might present to one but not the other. Another area to consider are the interests of your audience. Any outside interests or reading materials could help you to understand both the common ground as well as the tone you need to convey. You'll also need to know your audience's current position on your topic. What audience outcomes can you anticipate based on this knowledge? Will they interpret the issue the same way that you do? You also need to consider how significant your issue is to the audience. Will this topic touch their lives, or will it remain theoretical for them? This can affect how you present details and even how you conclude with a call to action. So having an idea of the significance can affect your writing. Are there any obstacles that will prevent your audience from accepting your claim as soon as you state it? What might those obstacles be? And how could you prevent your audience from dismissing you before you even get started? This is where the common ground oftentimes comes in. Finding that common ground that both you and your audience can agree upon will help them to be more open to your thesis. Another item of consideration where your audience is in this ongoing conversation on the issue. Are they just getting introduced to it? Or do they have some solid background knowledge? Will they require background knowledge and possibly even definitions that you need to fill in? Are they knowledgeable enough in the content to contemplate policy changes? Next, you'll need to know what your audience's attitude is towards you. Do they know you on any level? Or do they only know about your basic bio information? What would they need to know about you to help in your argument? Or might it hinder you in some way? Also, what beliefs and values do you and your audience share? This could help you again with the common ground component and the possibility of lacing little pieces of common ground throughout your own writing instead of just in the introduction. After all, you want to hold their attention and keep it going throughout. You will also need to ask yourself what motivations your audience has. Having a clear understanding of your audience's goals and motivations can point you in the right direction for the subtopics you'll need to explore and cover. For example, if your audience is a group of business leaders, they're going to be more inclined to understand the value of the dollar and saving money. For that reason, you would want facts and statistics that outline financials within your topic. If you're presenting to a group of nurses or nursing students, the care of their patients would be a higher priority. So your focus would entail subtopics centered around those areas. All of the information you have gathered on your audience will help you to understand what argument style will work best for your audience. And the argument style goes back to the types of arguments. Based on the data you've gathered and what you know about your audience, what type of argument do you feel is going to work best to help sway that one target person to your modality of thinking? The most common question I get after all of the information you already have absorbed is usually, but where do I start? Well, that's really going to depend on you. Your professor might assign you a topic or theme to center your research around. But even within those constraints, there's still a need to narrow down your topic enough to have a clear focus. After all, you want to be able to present a few deep aspects about your topic, not a bunch of narrow details that don't give the audience enough to chew on. You want them to receive a deeper understanding of your stance and your thesis. And for that, you will need to bring your topic into a manageable range of research. After all, you might only have a span of 6 minutes to present your information, or a span of 30. In terms of writing, you might be allowed 4 pages, or you might have to fill as many as 14. Your job is to ensure that no matter what, you are using that time and/or space wisely in terms of presenting to your audience and swaying them. Every second and every word should be carefully planned out to maximize your message. Of course, with as much time and effort as you're going to put into researching and writing, that also means that you're going to have to pick something you care about. Because who wants to spend that much time on a topic that bores them? With that in mind, I want you to consider the following questions. What issues do you find compelling? What are some historical or ongoing topics that you could explore and bring new light to? What is a hidden issue that you want to uncover and expose? I had one student who used this type of a question in conjunction with their field of study to create their thesis. And their thesis ended up being quite interesting for their final argumentative paper. It had to do with the rights of press, and not the press who have the ID badges, the press who are personal bloggers and online media swingers. And so she explored whether or not these people had the same rights as those that are nationally syndicated or even locally employed by big press. And she was able to expose or uncover some of those items. It's very interesting. What is an argued issue that you feel does not present tested claims, one that leaves the issue open for continual debate with no real solution. Maybe you want to explore that. Whatever it is that you choose to explore, make sure it's something that will hold your interest. Because if you can't hold your own interest in this topic, how do you expect to hold your audience's interest? It will show in the writing. All right, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out. Make sure you use the LMS system for whatever school you are at, whether it is Blackboard, Brightspace, Canvas, or something else. There is an inbox feature, and that is what you should be using. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you on the flip side.